today I thought, because it's on virtual beings, I'd sort of talk about the approach that we're taking to try to create a truly autonomous virtual being. Now, in our company, we do we also do more commercially focused digital human assistants, which work with NLP and so forth. But today I thought I'd focus on Baby X, which is what we're trying to do with Baby X is pretty much build a very, very lifelike and intelligent computer being. And so the main thesis is that, you know, people are fundamentally, we're biological creatures. So to build a truly lifelike virtual being requires a biologically based approach. Now, it's the same sort of thing if you're building a physics model. You have the easiest way to do that actually is to build representing a physical system is to build a physics-based model, because in the long run, all the parameters combine in such complex ways that the only way to kind of keep it coherent is to actually have a strong sort of basis to it. Now, I'll just play, for those who don't know Baby X, I'll just play a clip which kind of shows you, gives you an introduction.
This is Baby X. She's one of the most advanced brain simulations in the world, and she's enjoying playing a peekaboo game with me. So, what is Baby X?
It's a virtual infant simulation. It's trying to create the elements which put together aspects of what makes something lifelike.
Baby X isn't an animation. She's a virtual human, and all of the behaviors are generated by neural networks. She watches and listens to what I do and makes her own decisions in real time about how to respond. If I teach her that this is a duck using associative learning, then something amazing happens that we do as well. We just take it completely for granted. Now watch what happens in Baby X's brain when I say the word duck to her. Duck. Her brain builds a link between the word duck and an actual duck. We can see that Baby X is looking at the spider and there's no reaction. But I'm now going to tell her it's something she should be scared of. Scary spider! The spider now provokes a clear fear response. The sight of the spider triggers specific parts of her brain. Her amygdala initiates a cascade of reactions which send chemicals into her system, generating the physical and emotional feelings of fear. When we take the spider away, she calms down. And when we bring it back, we can see she's now scared of it. When Baby X presses the green button, a duck appears. And when she presses the red button, a snake appears. As Baby X continues to press the buttons, her brain begins to form new connections. She wants to see a duck, so she's working out pressing the green button gets her what she wants. This ability to learn sequences and to predict what might be about to happen next is crucial to everything we do. We all know that making eye contact is a powerful way to create a sense of connection. There's a chemical in your brain called oxytocin, the hug drug, which also has an amazing effect on how we connect with other people. I'm going to increase her levels of oxytocin, and let's see what effect that has. Baby X makes a clear shift to focus on eye contact. We're connecting, and she even gives me a smile. Inside Baby X's brain, we can see oxytocin being released. Here it's the greeny blue bits secreted by her pituitary gland. The simple act of connection means she's rewarded with oxytocin, which makes her seek even more connection. And even though I'm interacting with a digital baby, the same thing is happening inside my brain.
So Baby X is really a large functioning sketch, and we're trying to take as holistic approach as possible, because, you know, to be human, we have so many things influencing our behavior. We've got our internal state, we've got our social connections, we've got you know, everything that's happening in real time in front of us. We've got our memories and so forth, and all of these interact to basically determine our behavior. And so the thing which is so difficult about you know, building virtual human model is that all of these factors actually influence each other. For example, visual attention interacts with motor control because it determines where our eyes look and where our head turns and where we point and so forth. Episodic memory affects our emotion. Language interfaces with a whole myriad of cognitive systems because in a way language is a mapping of, it's the easiest way that we can actually map to another person what our internal state is. So basically the key point here is that our behavior emerges as the result of many, many systems which interact at different scales. And that's also different time scales. And then when we interact with other people, these components interact with those components in other people. And so we're trying to create a face-to-face interaction with the computer, basically. Now, in order to do this, we've developed what we call brain language, which allows us to interconnect all kinds of different modules to build effectively a virtual connectome. Now, this connectome can create, so in this system, you can have everything from very small neural networks, like, for example, this is a rhythmogenesis circuit, which basically can be modulated. For example, you can change the amount of carbon dioxide or the cortisol or whatever, which will actually affect the breathing rate of the digital human. But you can build simple networks, but you can also build more complex networks. So we make a large amount of use of self-organizing maps. So the system kind of self-organizes. Now there's a very strong biological basis for these self-organizing maps in the brain. So pretty much this is a simple example. And so you can see the homunculus on the right, which is really how the brain maps the somatosensory aspect of the body. Now, if you take just say simple data like RGB type color information and you hit go on a self-organizing map, it basically figures out how to organize it. Now our brain is doing this all the time on all kinds of different levels where we're actually creating effectively clusters of information that actually have, there's a topological connection as well. Now, time-wise, you can do the same sort of thing to create episodic memory. So it's like, these maps will basically generate their link through time, and there's evidence in things like the hippocampus, which is very involved in episodic memory, that it has the same sort of architecture. Now, the thing is in Baby X is that there are many, many, many coupled dynamic systems. So each system has its own autonomous dynamics, but it's coupled with other ones. So for example, breathing. So we have the emotional components of Baby X, which are like they have a physiological basis where we effectively have things like virtual cortisol, virtual dopamine, serotonin, and so forth. And now what these do is these actually modulate other circuits. Like for example, the breathing circuit can be affected by the amount of stress in the system to increase the breathing rate and so forth. But that stress in the system is determined by all kinds of characters. If it can even be, like how you're reacting, the tone of voice or whatever will affect the stress system, which will then affect the breathing system. So this is how all of these things kind of get coupled together. Now, what we're building is a cognitive architecture which connects all these different elements, and we're using the brain as a template. So I want to emphasize that we're building toy models of all this stuff. This stuff is incredibly complicated. We don't even really know all the details of this, but there's lots of theories about how these things interconnect. But there's general agreement on certain levels, and there's a general sort of understanding of basic brain architecture where the control systems and so forth modulate and control behavior. So we are building these different components and interconnecting them. And so we've been building all kinds of different aspects of cognition and emotion. So memory, learning, behavior, goal setting, planning, perception, imagination, and connecting all these dots together. Now, this shows you an example of, now we also, what we do for these models is we actually try to put them in the appropriate places in the brain. So we have a computer sort of analogy, computational analogy, but we also try to have a neuroanatomical analogy for this. So for example, things which, like for example, brainstem circuits, which are in the brainstem, which are affecting breathing, will actually be placed in that component on the brain, so that when you visualize it, you can kind of see the sense. And I'll just replay this one again so that you can see the actual virtual connectome is actually anatomically connected here. So, we're building bits and bits. All these dots represent what we've built to date on lots of these components. Now, how do we validate such a model? So many different factors, but what we've been doing is effectively creating an early behavior Turing test. So this is where we get real children, real babies, infants up to 2 years old, to interact with caregivers or parents through effectively a digital screen. And that digital screen can be building blocks, farmyard scenes, all kinds of different things. It can be playing peekaboo. But the common interface is basically the screen that people look through. And then we've been tracking basically what the baby's doing, what the parent's doing, and looking at all the behavioral aspects of that, because we're really trying to look at what are the core elements of cooperation and all the components of social learning in detail that we can then replace the real baby with baby X. And then if we can elicit the same behavior out of the parent in teaching baby X, then that's the validation point, because we're basically, and now we have, for the first time in psychology experiments, we actually have a digital character that can actually be precisely controlled. So we can do things like manipulate the eye behavior, we can the emotional behavior, the stress, all these types of things, and see how a parent regulates with that. Because just as we are born to learn, we are also born to teach. Now, one of the key sort of exciting elements of this is that because baby X is a architecture composed of multiple autonomous dynamic systems which are coupled, that these operate in parallel. The different time scales, some of the inputs are internal, some are external. So the system becomes embodied, but it's also inactive. It actually interacts with its environment to learn the parameters of that environment. And so the interaction that you get out of it is ultimately emergent. And so one of the sort of exciting possibilities is that by building such emergent systems, it actually creates the potential to exceed our intentions in building it and to create non-trivial behavior as a path to AGI. So I'll finish with one thought, which is what we're trying to build is a model which can actually experience. So rather than like GTP3, we train on a massive corpus from Reddit and Wikipedia and so forth. This is all about grounded learning. So meaning in grounded interactions, because we are constantly relating what we learn back to our experiences to find meaning in it. So if we can create a computer character that can actually interact with the world, form those memories that then get basically activated through interactions, we're creating a system where it's a co-creation of what happens. Now it means that what you do affects what the digital character does, and what it does reflects back and actually affects you back. So it's actually a co-created environment. So I've made it short so I don't run out of batteries. So I'll finish there and can take some questions if you like.
That's amazing. Great. I've asked the audience for any questions they might have, and please put them in the chat if you've got one. I'm just curious, this might be a softball question or off the wall, but comparing training of using stimulus and feedback to data set training, which a lot of AIs are done, do you have any opinions on whether they can both produce good results, or do you think having stimulus and response is key to the training of artificial intelligence?
Well, there's a practicality of this. So the practicality of this is that you don't want to have, like if you're going to create a digital being, you don't want to give it an entire lifetime in order to learn everything through stimulus response. And so the practical thing is that you want the best of both worlds there. So for example, with elements of visual recognition, it helps to pre-train some of those components so that you've actually got something to bootstrap on, for example. Now you can train it from scratch. So everything that we've been building can be trained from scratch, but it's not necessarily the most practical approach, because every time you fire up the baby model, you don't want to have it rolling around on the floor for 6 months or something like that. So there's the practical level of that. But the key thing is that the system is able to learn online in real time, and it's able to augment the memories that it's already built. And so data-driven approaches too is one of the things there is, if we read a book about, say, a city that we've never been to, Timbuktu, for example, we've never been there, we've never experienced it, but we can learn about it. Like, a lot of our knowledge is actually based, it's sort of fact-based knowledge that we've read. And this is a little bit like GTP3, is that you've got tons and tons of data which are kind of facts, and they're linked sort of ontologically. And they're not necessarily linked experientially. Now, the key point here is that if you're going to relate to a digital being on a different level, yes, it can be a big factual database and we can get information coming out of it, but it's be very interesting in the future, and I think especially for things like entertainment and so forth, that the digital human can actually express how it feels about something. Now, but in order to feel something about something, it has to somehow have a grounding in some form of emotional experience on that factor. So, I sort of envision the day where, you can talk to a computer about, how does it feel to access everything all at once in a millisecond? How does it feel to see the rings around Saturn, because it's something out in space there. So it's like I think that, we look at human cooperation and imagination has been the most powerful force in history. If we can truly cooperate with intelligent machines, that will define the next era of history. So we want to be able to converse and interactively flow with that. But we also want the ability to actually have impact and impact backwards. So for example, a conversation between people is best if both people come out of that conversation with new ideas. You don't want to be just talked to and listen. That would be, that is still effective for a student, for example, and a teacher. But in a sort of adult conversation, you really want both people to grow from that experience and to explore new possibilities and things like that. So how can we actually do that with machines?
Okay, and you could tell me if you've already just answered this, but Paul DeBevic asks a related question. First of all, he says, great talk, Mark. Then he says, with large deep learning models becoming so powerful these days, do you think it's possible to train a behavior model based on observations of real human videos without any explicit internal system modeling?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of I totally think that that's possible. So for example, tracking videos. So pretty much this is learning completely from observation. So and then you can let the dynamics of that system, for example, if you run it, you run these networks backwards and they're in generative or dream mode, then they can create that. So I think that's a very valid approach. Is it relatable is the question here, which is we kind of go to. If you have a virtual being, I think that, what hi Paul, by the way, but I think what Paul's suggesting is absolutely very, very tractable, very doable. And we also look at those sort of approaches in our company. And so but to make a relatable character which appears lifelike, I think the more you ground that in something which can kind of have experiences like us, then you can co-create those experiences. So here's a good example of why this is practical. If I have a large data set trained model, So at the moment, as we know, this takes a long time to train with these massive data sets, billion parameter models and so forth. Now, the problem is what happens if we're now, we're having a conversation and we're discussing something which has happened in the here and now. We need to be learning and updating those models pretty much instantly. So, or within minutes, when we consolidate information. So I guess what we look at is we look at a short-term and a long-term memory approach. So on a short-term memory approach, everything's working memory, it's all happening in the short term, so that the interactions actually, you can learn on the fly in those. Now, if you want longer term consolidated memory, then you can use sort of, basically, gradient descent type models on those to basically get, get more deeper connections. And so what we've been kind of building is a system which can actually kind of dream, and then it'll process information while it's asleep, but it can also learn on the fly. So it can learn in both online, short term and long term.
Great. Another question from Sean S. With narrow AI, reward and/or motivation can often be a hurdle. What motivates Baby X? I'm guessing it's not hard-coded.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing, this is one of the things which is one of my personal motivations for doing this project, is that I'm absolutely fascinated by what drives us. In a way, Baby X is a sort of exploration of human nature through these models. So, we talk about, so novelty, for example, is a real driver in animals, pretty much. They will explore new things, they get little dopamine hits for exploring that. So that's our kind of reinforcement learning type approach. But people also, there's also mastery. Like if we do something and we have to have a discovery thing where we experiment with the environment to figure out what we can change and what benefits us. But we also, so that's play, and our play is non-goal directed behavior. Then we've also got when we master something. So what we're doing is we're doing error reduction in that thing, optimizing how well we can predict something. Now, we also then go into things like goal-driven behavior, where we basically want to achieve something, but we need to do that through goals and sub-goals and things like that to plan to achieve a particular thing. Now, we may want to combine all of these approaches in order to achieve something. So if I want to learn something new, but I know that it requires doing this first, I have to have a goal-driven component to my learning as well. So the motivations for this are, looking at these absolute core drivers in those areas and seeing, so, you can even go right down to the neuron in some of these that there's a thing called spike timing dependent plasticity. And I believe that is the biological basis of causal learning, just from and at a larger scale, statistically, the order with which things happen influences how we understand them. This caused this. If this happened after this, then it didn't cause that. So all of these types of informations come together. Now, we also appreciate things in different levels. So one of the theories of learning too is that there's an optimal area between order and chaos. So if we look at something like a fully noisy environment is something that you can't really learn from. An environment which is too ordered, there's nothing interesting in it. It's too limited. But there's this sort of region where there is the border of sort of complexity and chaos, where we can really learn. And I think we are pre-tuned to basically be operating in that area to optimize. So we will learn something as long as we can understand some structure in it. And so our behavior actually seeks that out. We push that to the point where we can actually get a non-diminishing return on that.
Fantastic.
So drivers here are things like, you can argue that, concepts about beauty, for example, beauty has an element, it's not just random, it's got structure in it, but that structure has a harmony in it. And we seem to be attracted to beauty. So we seem to seek out elegance. You know, these are some of these core motivations. Now you can build computer models to do exactly that.
Fantastic. Just a side note, Eve Berquist at the Entertainment Tech Center talks about, I think it's familiarness or something. If a story is too similar to one you've already seen, you don't care. If it's too far out there, you don't pay attention to it, it's too weird. So a good story falls somewhere in between, something you can identify with and something that's new.
And exactly, and this is one of the key points with BabyX. And building a complex system like this, it doesn't get boring because it can always change in all these ways. And so, you know, you add learning to the equation, it's constantly evolving. And that's the key thing, I think, with a virtual being, to make that virtual being not boring, is you want it to be evolving pretty much.